John Walton's interpretation of Genesis has been criticized a bunch of times. A pretty common criticism of it seems to be that he affirms that creation is exclusively about function and not function and existence. That's the criticism that William Lane Craig offered too, and I do agree with him. Because we shouldn't just interpret the text, so look at just the text and the context, so the cultural context that produced it, so to speak. We should also, since we are Christians, so both me and Craig and Walton, right, affirm the truth of the text. And that doesn't mean that we should be hyper-literalists or anything like that, but we should take both the text and other kind of information we have about reality into consideration. So assume, for example, that it's exclusively about function. Okay, but we also know that the world is several million years old, right? So then what would it mean? Well, it would mean that God created the world, and it already had animals and birds and all of this kind of stuff, okay? And then at some point, or then at 6 days or whatever, at some period, he started adding some function to creation. So what exactly does that change, though? Does it imply that birds were not flying and then they started flying at some point with that function? Well, not really, right? They were probably already flying, they were probably already doing some kind of stuff like that, right? And if that's the case, then what does function even change? Doesn't really seem to change too much, right? Of course, could be something about making the creation more fit for God's plan or whatever. That would be a little bit questionable. And then assume that, oh no, they started flying when he added function and stuff like that. That's probably a bit strange too. So he created them, they already existed, right? Oh, but then when creation is described in Genesis, then he adds this function, so to speak. So that seems like a weird, absurd position, right? And then Walton replied to Craig about this criticism that it's absurd that he created the world. Then after, I don't know how much long, he just, added some function or whatever. And he said, no, the burden of proof is on you. You have to show that it's about both function and existence. It's just function. And that's like a very silly response, right? That's not a sophisticated response. So his position is not just that it's about function, it's also the position that it's not about existence, right? So by claiming that it's not about existence, he is actually making a claim about what it is about, right? And either that is justified or not. So rather than providing a justification, if all he's doing is claim, you on the other side, you have to provide the burden of proof or whatever. You have the burden of proof, you have to provide a justification. That's obviously not a serious kind of response. So that would be one sort of problem with John Walton. Another kind of problem is in his interpretation of the Gospels, where he talked about demons. He said that, the text just affirms that demons are only part of the mental worldview of the people, right? So the text just implies that, people believe that demons exist. It doesn't actually imply that demons actually exist. That's silly, right? All of these passages about how Jesus takes the demons, sends them to these animals and all of this kind of stuff, right? I don't think the text itself it assumes that it's just part of the mental worldview. That's a very silly kind of claim. That's more ridiculous even than the other claim that he has about interpreting Genesis. And of course, I'm not going to argue for hyper-literalism when it comes to Genesis. I think I have a similar position with Craig, that it's myth history, so there are mythological elements in it, and they should be taken into consideration. But regardless of the genre of the text, when the text talks about creation, that's not exclusively about function, right? Sometimes it's also about existence, even though that's not necessarily how existence came to be, right? Because it's myth history. So if I, for example, make up a story and I say that some golden figure appeared in front of me and told me some story that's the truth or whatever, right? In my story, the golden figure actually appears. So it's also about something that appears to exist. It's not just about function, right? Even though maybe that story didn't actually happen, right? Even though It might be just some kind of a myth that provides you with some kind of a lesson or whatever. It depends on what that story would be about. And I'm not saying that stuff in Genesis didn't happen. I do affirm the historical Adam and a bunch of other stuff. My position is similar to Craig's. All I'm saying is that since it's myth of history, even though it's about existence, well, that doesn't have to be young Earth creationism or anything like that. So nonetheless, there are a few different problems with Walton, both in terms of Genesis and the New Testament kind of interpretation of what the demons are, right? And these are just interpretations of what the text says, but that seems a bit absurd. So then, that would make me question, is he really a good scholar? And I would claim that he's not really a rank A sort of scholar. He's not really one of the best or anything like that. He's some kind of a popularizer level scholar that, he may have some decent stuff somewhere, like when he talks about the flood, right? In a different book, like The Lost World of the Flood or whatever. So there might be some decent stuff there, but overall, I'm not taking him super seriously because of the reasons that I mentioned. So when I say that we should take into consideration both the text, the cultural context of it, but also all other stuff that we know about reality, I don't mean that this should be our interpretation, our exegesis of the text. I don't mean that we should claim that, since through cosmology or whatever we know that the Earth is a few million years, that we should affirm that Genesis says that it is a few million years. All I'm saying is that since we are Christians, since we affirm the text, and we also know a bunch of other stuff by doing cosmology or whatever, right? Then our theological and philosophical worldview about what happened in the past should include both of those things. And that could influence our interpretation of the text, not in a sense by adding weird stuff that's not there, so not doing eisegesis and claiming that, the text is about cosmology. Of course it's not, right? That's not the cultural context of the time itself. But it could make us see that, maybe it's actually myth of history or something like that, right? So if it's myth of history, then the content still matters, but not in a literalistic sense completely, right? There are some elements which are literal and others which are not. So I'm not arguing for eisegesis, I'm not arguing for weird stuff, just a clarification.